Hello and welcome. If you clicked on this video, you're likely fascinated by the golden age of Hollywood and one of its brightest stars, Frank Sinatra. But this video isn't just about Frank. It's about the three people who had to navigate the gigantic, all-consuming shadow he cast as children. In this deep-dive documentary, we're going to pull back the curtain on their incredible and often turbulent lives. First, we'll explore the astonishing career and rebellious spirit of his firstborn Nancy Sinatra, the woman who went from being Frank's daughter to a global icon in her own right. Then we will uncover the harrowing, minute-by-minute true story of Frank Sinatra Jr.'s infamous kidnapping and dissect his lifelong painful struggle to forge his own identity. And finally, we'll reveal the story of the quietest, but perhaps most powerful Sinatra Tina, the fierce protector of the family legacy, who chose to wield her power, not on the stage, but behind the scenes. I've spent weeks poring over biographies, rare televised interviews, and archival documents to piece together the full human story that goes far beyond the tabloid headlines. This isn't just a list of facts. It's an exploration of the true cost of a legendary name. So stick with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see the Sinatra dynasty forever. Number 3. Nancy Sinatra. Most people know one song, a confident bass-driven anthem that became a declaration of female independence. But the story of Nancy Sinatra, the trailblazing firstborn, is so much more than one hit song. It's a story of defiance against the industry that tried to box her in a calculated reinvention that made her a global superstar, and a complex, loving relationship with the larger-than-life man she simply called Dad. Born on June 8, 1940, Nancy Sandra Sinatra was from her first breath showbiz royalty. She was the apple of her father's eye. Frank doted on her famously, recording the song Nancy with a laughing face in her honor. Growing up, her world was a whirlwind of celebrity parties, film sets, and recording studios. It was a gilded cage, beautiful but restrictive. The expectation was immense. She was the daughter of The Voice. Her early career was a struggle. In the early 1960s, her label, Reprise Records, which her father owned, tried to market her as a wholesome, sweet-voiced singer, a carbon copy of the female vocalists of the era. The songs were forgettable, the image was bland, and her records went nowhere. In an industry where her father was king, she was on the verge of being dropped from his own label. She was nearly 25, and her career was considered a failure. She feared her destiny was to be nothing more than a footnote in her father's story. But Nancy had a rebellious streak. She knew the sweet girl image wasn't her. She needed a change, a dramatic one. The change came in the form of a songwriter and producer named Lee Hazelwood. He saw something in her that no one else did in Edge. He told her, "You've been singing for too long from a girl's point of view. It's time to sing from a woman's." He lowered her vocal key, giving her a sultrier, more world-weary sound. He told her to stop smiling and start sneering. And then came the song that would change everything. These Boots Are Made for Walkin. Written by Hazelwood, was raw, assertive, and oozing with attitude. It was a threat wrapped in a pop song. When it was released in 1966, it was a cultural explosion. It shot to #1 in the US and the UK. But it wasn't just the song. It was the entire package. Nancy adopted a new look to match miniskirts, heavy eyeliner, and of course the iconic go-go boots. She became an instant style icon, a symbol of the burgeoning women's liberation movement. She wasn't Frank Sinatra's daughter anymore. She was Nancy Sinatra. Her success was meteoric. She followed Boots with a string of hits, many with Hazelwood, like Sugartown, Some Velvet Morning, and the theme song to the James Bond film You Only Live Twice. She was a certified pop star. She even carved out a film career, most famously starring alongside Elvis Presley in Speedway. She had done the impossible. She had escaped the shadow. However, as the 60s ended and musical tastes changed her chart, success began to wane. She married, had children, and chose to step back from the intense glare of the spotlight to focus on her family. Yet she never truly left the business. She continued to record music periodically, and her influence became more apparent over time. Artists from Madonna to Lana Del Rey have cited her style and attitude as an inspiration. In her later years, she became the devoted daughter once more, especially as her father's health declined. She was by his side fiercely protective and loving. After his death, she became a dedicated curator of his legacy, authoring books about him and helping to manage his vast musical catalog. Today, Nancy is the matriarch of the Sinatra family, a living link to a bygone era, but also a trailblazer who proved that you could honor a legendary name while making one for yourself. But while Nancy was conquering the pop charts with her rebellious anthems, her younger brother was about to face a real-life nightmare, a terrifying ordeal that would define his life and haunt the Sinatra family forever. Number 2. Frank Sinatra Jr. The name was the same. The voice was strikingly similar. The profession was identical, but for Frank Sinatra Jr., the path was infinitely harder. His entire life was a battle for his own identity, a battle that was brutally and violently interrupted by a crime so audacious it seemed ripped from a movie script. Born Francis Wayne Sinatra on January 10, 1944, he was Frank Sinatra's only son. From the beginning, the pressure was immense. He was expected to be the heir to the throne, the one to carry on the musical dynasty. He was a talented musician and pianist, and by his late teens, he was a skilled vocalist fronting his own band. But no matter how well he sang, the comparison was always there. He sounded like his father, but he wasn't his father. Critics were often unkind, audiences were skeptical. He was trapped in an impossible position. Then, on the night of December 8, 1963, his struggle for identity was overshadowed by a fight for his life. At just 19 years old, Frank Jr. was performing at Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe. After his show, he was in his dressing room with a friend when two men burst in brandishing guns. They tied up his friend and at gunpoint forced Frank Jr. out into the freezing snowy night, wearing only his stage clothes. They blindfolded him and threw him into the back of a Chevrolet. The kidnappers were Barry Keenan, a 23-year-old former classmate of Nancy Sinatra, and Joe Amsler, also 23. They were amateurs driven by a bizarre mix of desperation and delusion. Keenan was the mastermind, believing the kidnapping was a karmic way to solve his financial problems. They drove him to a hideout in a Los Angeles suburb. Their ransom demand was $240,000, the equivalent of over $2 million today. They made contact with Frank Sinatra Sr., who was thrown into a state of panic and fury. He immediately called his friend, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, and the FBI launched one of its largest investigations in history. Sinatra was a man used to being in control, but now he was helpless. The kidnappers instructed him to go to a gas station and wait for a call at a payphone. Frank, surrounded by FBI agents, waited anxiously. The phone rang, but in his haste and stress, Frank ran out of coins and the line went dead. He was terrified he had blown his only chance to save his son. He reportedly screamed in frustration, a rare moment of public vulnerability for the usually unflappable star. Meanwhile, Frank Jr. was blindfolded and tied to a chair in the hideout. He was surprisingly calm later, stating he was so exhausted from his tour that he mostly just slept. The kidnappers, on the other hand, were falling apart. The third accomplice, John Irwin, who was meant to be the go-between, had a nervous breakdown. He confessed the entire plot to his brother, who immediately called the FBI. Just 54 hours after the abduction, the ransom was paid. The kidnappers, feeling the heat from the massive FBI manhunt, released Frank Jr. in Bel Air. He was found wandering dazed, but unharmed. Within days, the FBI had captured all 3 kidnappers. The ordeal was over, but the nightmare had just begun. During the trial, the kidnapper's defense lawyer floated a cruel and baseless theory that Frank Jr. had orchestrated the whole thing himself as a publicity stunt to boost his career. The media ran with it. The public, already skeptical of the perceived privilege of the Sinatra name, began to whisper. For the rest of his life, Frank Jr. would be haunted by the shadow of this accusation. It was a wound that never truly healed. He resumed his career, but the kidnapping and the rumors that followed had taken their toll. He spent decades on the road, performing in casinos and clubs, a journeyman musician, forever in the shadow. He was often described as melancholic and serious, a man burdened by his name rather than blessed by it. But in the late 1980s, he found a unique way to make peace with his legacy. Frank Sinatra Sr., in his final years of performing, asked his son to become his musical director and conductor. For Frank Jr., it was the ultimate validation. He stood on stage not as a pale imitation, but as the trusted custodian of his father's music, leading the orchestra for the man who was his hero and his burden. He later said that in those moments standing behind his father, he was finally at peace. Frank Sinatra Jr. continued to perform his father's music and his own with reverence and skill until his death. He passed away suddenly from a heart attack on March 16, 2016, while on tour in Daytona Beach, Florida. He died doing what he had done his whole life, making music forever linked to the name Sinatra. Frank Jr. fought his battles in the public eye under the crushing weight of his father's fame and a crime that made him infamous. But there was one Sinatra child who chose a completely different path, not in front of the microphone, but behind the scenes, wielding a different, more subtle kind of power. Number 1. Tina Sinatra. She didn't have a #1 hit record. She didn't star in a blockbuster movie. But Christina Sinatra, known to the world as Tina, may be the most influential Sinatra of them all. She became the keeper of the flame, the shrewd businesswoman, and the iron-willed guardian who would protect her father's legacy at all costs. Born on June 20, 1948, Tina was the youngest of Frank's children with his first wife, Nancy Barbato. Growing up, she saw the immense pressures her older siblings faced in the performance world and decided early on that it wasn't for her. While Nancy embraced the spotlight and Frank Jr. was pushed into it, Tina was more observant, more analytical. She was fascinated by the business behind the show. She dabbled in acting in her early 20s, but quickly realized her true talents lay elsewhere. She had her father's business acumen and his fierce, unyielding loyalty. She started a theatrical agency and began to learn the ropes of production and deal-making. She was smart, tough, and she understood the power of the Sinatra name in a way her siblings, the artists, perhaps did not. Her role as the family's protector became solidified in the later years of her father's life. She saw how his brand was being managed or mismanaged and took a more active role. After Frank Sinatra's death in 1998, her position became official. She took control of the family estate and the powerful entity known as Frank Sinatra Enterprises. Her mission was clear: to preserve and protect the legacy of Frank Sinatra for future generations. This wasn't just about re-releasing old albums. Tina became a prolific producer, a gatekeeper who decided which projects would be authorized and which would not. She produced the acclaimed 1992 TV miniseries Sinatra, which was a ratings smash, and gave the definitive family-approved version of his life story. She oversaw documentaries, tribute concerts, and the licensing of his music and image. Her approach was often uncompromising. She was known for being a tough negotiator, fiercely protective of how her father was portrayed. Some have called her controlling, but those close to the family say she was simply doing what Frank would have wanted, protecting the brand. She understood that her father's legacy was not just art, but also a multi-million-dollar business that needed to be managed with precision and strength. In 2000, she gave the world its most intimate look into the Sinatra family with her memoir, My Father's Daughter. The book was a candid, loving, and at times brutally honest account of life with her legendary father. It detailed his passions, his flaws, his temper, and his immense generosity. It was her way of setting the record straight, of telling his story from the inside through the eyes of the daughter who had watched from the wings. Unlike her siblings, Tina has largely remained a private figure. She doesn't seek out interviews or the limelight. Her power is exerted in boardrooms and production offices. She is the quiet force, the CEO of a legacy, ensuring that the voice of Frank Sinatra will never be silenced. So there you have it. 3 children, 1 legendary father, and 3 wildly different paths. The pop icon, the haunted musician, and the powerful protector. Their stories show that legacy isn't a single path. It's a complex inheritance that each heir must learn to carry in their own way. The pressure of a famous name can be a launching pad, or it can be a crushing weight. The story of the Sinatra children and how they navigated the shadow of a giant is a fascinating chapter in music history. But they aren't the only musical dynasty with incredible untold stories. A while back on this channel, we took a deep dive into the monumental career of Sir Paul McCartney, a legend from a different era, but one who cast an equally long shadow. You can check that video out if you're interested in the architects of modern music. But as incredible as his career was, the story of his 5 children is just as fascinating, a mix of world-famous fashion designers, acclaimed photographers, musicians, and artists who each had to find their own way to shine outside the blinding light of a Beatle. If you think the Sinatra story was a roller coaster, you won't want to miss the complex, creative, and sometimes controversial untold story of the McCartney children. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because that's a story you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which Sinatra child story surprised you the most.